If you ever find a black plastic bag wedged where a wall meets a floor, don't tell yourself. It's just trash someone forgot. Trash doesn't know your name. Trash doesn't carry your birthday. And trash doesn't sit in one corner of your business like it's waiting for you to kneel. My name is Luis Mendoza. I run a small corner store on the ground floor of my house. A tiendita with the basic soft drinks, bread, a barotis, and a small fridge for jam and queso, yogurt, and cold cuts. Upstairs is home. For years the stairs were just stairs. Work below, sleep above, a life that stayed within its own walls. Then, in a few weeks, everything started spoiling like time had sped up. It began with milk. I opened a carton I'd stocked the day before and watched it split into pale clumps, as if someone had dropped acid into it. The expiration date was still far away. I blamed the supplier, tossed it, opened another, and when that one poured normal, I let the fear dissolve into irritation. 2 days later, a different brand curdled the same way. Yogurt turned sour on the second day after opening. Sausages that should have lasted a week began to smell sweet and rotten. Jam went slimy. Queso started to sweat and collapse. I scrubbed the refrigerator with chloro, adjusted the temperature, rearranged shelves, and kept losing product anyway. The complaints followed. A woman returned a loaf of sliced bread and pressed the bag to show me how damp it was inside. A regular said a soda tasted rare, like metal and dust. Some demanded refunds. Others simply stopped coming. The bell over my door used to sing all day. Now it went quiet long enough for me to stare at the entrance and feel my own patience turning bitter. Upstairs, my family changed with the store. We woke with headaches. We slept and still felt drained. The smallest things started fights, nothing dramatic, just constant friction, like sand in a hinge. I kept telling myself it was stress, heat, money. When you're scared, you choose an explanation you can live with. Then the store gave me details I couldn't wave away. In one back corner, against the wall where I stacked heavy boxes of slow-selling goods, flies gathered. Not a swarm, not a disaster, just always there, hovering in the same patch of air as if that corner had a smell only they could taste. I bleached the floor, sprayed, moved boxes. They would disappear and return to the same spot, patient as a habit. Above that corner, on the right side of the ceiling, one bulb began to burn out over and over. I replaced it, and days later it would die again. The other bulbs stayed bright for months. I told myself it was bad wiring, but if it was wiring, why only there? And a few boxes began to shift by themselves, not toppled, not dragged, just nudged a few centimeters out of line. I would close the store with the stacks squared. In the morning, one box would be turned slightly, like someone had tested its weight and changed their mind. I tried to blame the uneven floor, but the angle always pointed back toward the wall. I checked the lock. I checked the windows. I asked my family if anyone had been downstairs at night. Everyone said no. I believed them, and still, I kept waking with the feeling that someone else was sharing my space, breathing behind my shelves. One afternoon, after another stretch of silence behind the counter, I stared at that corner until a thought cut through me. Food doesn't rot on schedule unless something teaches it how. What if the rot wasn't happening to the corner? What if it was coming from it? I pulled the metal shutter halfway down so the shop looked closed from the street, then went to the back and started moving every box. Dust floated in the slanted light. The deeper I went, the more the air smelled damp, like wet earth trapped behind concrete. When the last box came away, I saw a narrow gap where the floor met the wall, packed with dirt like a slit the building had been hiding. I knelt, dug my fingers into the grit, and touched something smooth and cold, wrinkled plastic. My hand locked in place. The store went so still, I could hear the refrigerator hum. I pinched the plastic and pulled. A black bag slid free from the gap, heavy for its size, tied tight, dusty as if it had been breathing under my wall for a long time. I held it in both hands, feeling the knot bite into my fingers, and a cold certainty settled in. Whatever was ruining my store had been planted inside it. I didn't open it right away. I set the bag on the counter and stood there, listening to the street through the metal shutter. The bag looked ordinary in the worst way, like something you'd use for trash. That was what made it dangerous. I pulled the shutter down, locked the door, and sat with the bag in front of me like an accusation. I told myself someone had hidden stolen goods there. I told myself it was a prank. Each explanation sounded weaker the longer the knot stayed uncut. Finally, I grabbed a box cutter and sliced it open. When the plastic gave, a smell leaked out that didn't belong in a store. Dampness, old earth, and the dry, fatty tang of meat left too long. It wasn't the smell of spoiled food. It was the smell of something kept for a purpose. My fingers touched paper first. I pulled out a folded printout on cheap white sheets. When I unfolded it, I saw my own face staring back at me, an unflattering photo, not posed, like someone had taken it from social media or snapped it when I wasn't looking. Under the photo was a white sheet folded into quarters. I opened it and read my name in clear pen strokes, followed by my full date of birth, written perfectly. The letters were firm, practiced, as if the hand had done this many times. A strip of light-colored cloth came next. My name was written on it too, the same steady ink. Tangled in the folds were hairs the same dark shade as mine. Not a handful, but enough to make my skin tighten. At the bottom of the bag were chunks of dried meat, sticky at the edges, dusted with a pale powder. Beneath that, a mixture of dirt and coarse salt clung to everything, gritty between my fingers, eager to spread. I didn't need a lecture to recognize what it was. I grew up hearing stories Amares, Trabuchos, Malda Ojo things people laugh at in daylight and fear at night. This wasn't a story. This was my face, my name, my birthday, my hair, wrapped in meat and earth, hidden inside my business. My hands went cold. I gathered everything back into the bag without throwing a single piece away, tied it tight, and placed it inside a clear plastic bag so I wouldn't touch it directly. I washed my hands until the skin stung, but the smell stayed in my nose. There was one person in the barrio everyone mentioned when strange things were found in homes. Matilda. People went to her for limpias, for prayers, for cuts when they swore they'd been worked on. I had never gone. I've always been the kind of man who fixes problems with receipts and tools, but this problem had already ignored my tools. That evening, I closed early and walked to her house with the clear bag swinging at my side. Matilda opened the door, looked at me, then at what I carried. What chilled me was her lack of surprise. "Come in," she said. Her kitchen was plain, a wooden table, mismatched chairs, an old stove. Against one wall sat a small altar, candles, saints' images, bundles of dried herbs. She pointed to a chair, and I sat with the bag on the table between us. I told her everything, the food spoiling early, the customers complaining, the headaches upstairs, the flies in one corner, the bulb that kept dying, the boxes shifting, and the gap in the wall. When I finished, she nodded once. "Open it." I untied the knot. The damp meat earth smell rose again. I laid out the contents, my photo, the paper with my name and birth date, the cloth strip, the hair, the meat, the dirt and salt. Matilda leaned in without flinching. She studied my face on the paper, read my birth date under her breath, held the cloth to the light, rubbed the dirt between her fingertips. "This is complete," she said. "A trabucho made for you, not for a stranger." My mouth went dry. For what? To make you tired, to make your house heavy, to spoil what you sell, to empty your place without anyone stealing a thing. She tapped the paper. "This is the address, your name and your day. It points the harm at you." She touched the cloth. "This binds." She nodded at the meat. "This turns food against you." Then she looked at the dirt and her expression tightened. "This isn't patio dirt," she said. "It looks like Pantheon earth." The word hit me like a door closing. Cemetery. Matilda stood and reached for an egg, a bottle of alcohol, and dried herbs. She filled a glass with water and told me to stand beside the table. She rolled the egg over my head, down my neck, across my chest, and along my arms. Halfway through, a sudden dizziness forced me to lock my knees. The shell didn't feel cold anymore. It felt loaded. When she finished, she cracked the egg into the water. The yolk dropped intact. The white unfurled in pale strands that stretched and clung. She turned the glass slowly, watching. "There's weight on you," she said. "Envy, a direct hit." I hated how relieved I felt. Not because it was good news, because it was real. She told me the day and the hour as if she were setting a doctor's appointment. "Until then," she said, "you keep your routine. You don't announce this to neighbors. You don't leave the bag where children can touch it, and you stop feeding the corner with fear." She made me promise not to open it again. The knot she tied looked like a fist. Walking back through the barrio, the clear bag felt heavier with every block. I kept glancing over my shoulder, not because I expected to see a ghost, but because I expected to see a person, someone ordinary watching, to make sure their work stayed hidden. The street smelled of exhaust and frying oil. A radio played somewhere behind a gate. Life looked normal, and that normality made what I carried feel even more unreal. That night I went upstairs and tried to act like nothing had happened. My family asked why I had closed early. I blamed a delivery issue and left it at that. When I lay down, sleep didn't come the way it used to. I kept seeing my own face on that paper. I kept hearing Dua Matilda's calm voice say Pantayan, as if the cemetery were not a place but a tool. And in the silence, I could almost hear the flies downstairs, orbiting a corner that no longer held the bag, but still felt claimed. Before I left, she added one sentence that stuck in my throat like smoke. In the Pantade Inn, don't curse and don't call anyone's name. The dead listen better than the living. The morning we agreed to go, I woke with a headache that felt like it had been nailed behind my eyes. But I didn't lie there arguing with myself the way I had in recent weeks. I got up, washed my face, and went downstairs to open the store. If the work had been placed to break my routine, I wasn't going to give it the satisfaction. I served a few customers, kept my voice steady, smiled when I could. Every time I opened the fridge, I braced for that sour, wrong smell. I checked dates, checked seals, checked temperatures. The food looked fine, but I didn't trust it. The corner was quiet that morning, almost mocking. Only one fly drifted by and vanished. The dead bulb above the right side of the back wall stared down like a closed eye. When the hour came, I lowered the shutter halfway and hung a sign that said, "I'd be back soon." I took the black bag still inside the clear plastic and made sure the knot was as tight as a promise. I didn't look inside. I didn't want to give it my attention again. Dua Matilda was already waiting outside her gate, a second bag hanging from her arm. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't offer comfort. She simply said, "Let's go." We walked through streets I had crossed 1,000 times, but with the bag in my hand, every corner felt new. The sun was up, yet the air felt gray. I could hear the city buses, vendors, laughter, but the sound seemed to skim the surface of my skin without entering. My thoughts stayed locked on one image, paper burning, my name turning to ash. The Pantayan sat at the edge of town behind an iron gate. The moment we stepped through, the temperature changed, not dramatically, just enough to make my arms prickle. The ground was uneven, patched with concrete, dirt, and weeds. Rows of graves leaned at slight angles like tired shoulders. Some had fresh flowers and clean ribbons. Others were cracked, names worn away, forgotten by everyone except the soil. Dua Matilda crossed herself quickly and kept walking. She didn't stop among the neat graves near the entrance. She headed deeper, turning into an area where the decorations thinned out and the crosses looked older, simpler, many without names. The air smelled of sun-baked stone and dry petals. Somewhere far off a bird called once, then went silent. She stopped at a low cement cross with no writing left on it. The base was cracked, the dirt around it packed hard as if many feet had passed without anyone staying. "Here," she said. I wanted to ask why that spot, why that cross, but the truth was I didn't care about the logic anymore. I cared about the cut. She spread an old piece of thick cloth on the ground beside the cross, rough like a work rag. Then she motioned for the bag. My hand hesitated for a fraction of a second before I gave it to her. The knot sat like a bruise on the plastic. Dua Matilda untied it slowly, with the patience of someone disarming a trap. She turned the bag over and let the contents slide onto the cloth. The dirt and salt fell first, then the dried meat, then the papers and fabric. In the bright cemetery light, my face on the printout looked pale, almost sickly, as if the photo itself had absorbed the weeks of exhaustion. She separated what belonged to me from what belonged to the working. My photo went into one pile. The paper with my name and birth date went on top. The cloth strip with my name laid across it like a bandage. Everything that said Luis Mendoza was gathered together, cleanly without hesitation. The dried meat and the dirt mixture stayed in the center of the cloth, ugly and ordinary. Looking at it there, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. The most dangerous things in the world are often the ones you could mistake for nothing. From her second bag, Dua Matilda took out a shallow metal tray, scarred and old. She set it on the ground, then placed the pile with my photo, my name, my birth date inside it. She uncapped the bottle of alcohol and poured it over the papers and cloth until the edges darkened and curled. The smell of alcohol hit my nose and mixed with the dusty cemetery air. She struck a match. The flame caught fast, racing along the alcohol, and suddenly my face was lit by fire. The paper buckled, the cloth shrank, the ink of my name blackened and vanished. For a moment, the heat pushed against my cheeks and my eyes watered, not from tears, but from smoke. As the fire ate the pile, a thought flashed through me so sharp it almost made me laugh. I had spent weeks scrubbing my fridge, arguing with my family, pleading with customers, when the real problem could be reduced to ash in a tray by a woman with steady hands. The smell changed as the burn deepened paper, fabric, and something harsher underneath, like old grease. Smoke rose in a narrow column and then bent in the wind toward us. My throat tightened. I wanted to step back, but Dua Matilda didn't move. She watched the fire like she was watching a clock. While the last pieces curled into black flakes, she knelt and took a small shovel from her bag. She began digging a hole beside the cross, not deep like a grave, but deep enough to swallow what remained. Each scoop of dirt made a dry, rasping sound. The shovel struck a small stone and rang once, a bright note in the muted cemetery. When the fire died down into glowing edges, she tipped the tray gently, letting the ash and charred scraps slide into the hole. It looked like nothing, like the remains of a careless bonfire, but I knew what it had been. My name had been there, my birth date had been there, the address she'd spoken about had been erased. Then she took the dried meat with her bare fingers and dropped it into the hole. It landed with soft, wet thuds. The pale powder clung to her skin. Finally, she pushed the dirt and salt mixture in after it, scraping the cloth clean with a practiced motion, as if she were making sure no piece stayed behind to hitch a ride. "Now," she said, and there was no drama in her voice, only certainty. She shoveled the dirt back over the hole, tamped it down with the flat of the shovel, then pressed it with her shoe until the surface looked untouched. She didn't leave a marker. She didn't decorate. She didn't apologize to the cross. She simply erased the evidence, the way you erase chalk from a board. For a few seconds I stood staring at the spot. The world didn't split open. No wind screamed. No shadow rose. The Pantai Inn stayed a Pantai Inn. Stone, dirt, dead names. And yet something in my chest loosened, like a knot untied inside muscle. Dua Matilda wiped her fingers on the cloth, folded it up, and returned the tray and shovel to her bag. "It's cut," she said, "not because I say it, because you returned it where it came from." On the way out, the cemetery seemed less dense. The same graves leaned, the same weeds grew, but my steps felt lighter, as if I had been walking with a hand on my neck and someone finally lifted it. Still, I didn't trust easy miracles. I had learned how quiet sabotage could be. I expected the store to stay sick for a while, like a wound after you remove the glass. I expected the headaches upstairs to linger. I expected customers to stay away. Doubt didn't disappear just because ash cooled. But the first change arrived fast, and it arrived in my nose. The next day, I went to the back corner, out of habit, and realized the damp, earthy smell was gone. I bleached the floor the same way I always had, half expecting the flies to return and circle like a warning. They didn't. One flew in from outside, landed on a candy wrapper, and left. The corner was just a corner again. I replaced the bulb on the right side of the ceiling with another new one. I waited for it to flicker out in a few days, the way it had been doing, like a stubborn signal. It stayed bright. Days passed, weeks. The light remained clean and steady, and for the first time in a long time my store looked like my store. Food stopped betraying me. The sausages stayed fresh until they were supposed to go bad. The jam stayed firm, the queso held its shape. Customers stopped returning with complaints. Some who had disappeared began to drift back, cautious at first, then normal again. The bell over the door started ringing the way it used to, and I felt a humiliating surge of gratitude towards something as simple as footsteps. Upstairs, my family breathed easier without us even realizing it. We still argued sometimes because families do, but the arguments stopped sticking to the day like cobwebs. The headaches faded into occasional aches instead of daily punishment. Sleep started to feel like sleep again, not like sinking into a heavy pool. The strangest part was how ordinary the relief looked from the outside. No one could point to a moment and say, that's when the curse left. It just stopped squeezing. It stopped pushing. It stopped feeding on small failures. I kept thinking of Dua Matilda's hands in the cemetery, how calm they were, how careful, how she treated my name like a fuse that had to be cut cleanly. And I understood another truth that made my skin prickle. If something so cruel could be assembled with paper, cloth, hair, meat, and dirt, then it could be assembled again just as easily. That thought didn't let me relax. It made me watch. When your life starts improving after weeks of decline, you don't celebrate right away. You check for tricks. You wait for the floor to shift again. I began to inspect the store the way a cautious man inspects a room after a fight corners. Seams, places where dust gathers because no one looks there unless they have to. In that careful attention, I started noticing the people around me again. A few blocks away, there was another small shop run by a woman named Norma Paredes. She had been there for years. She also watched. She watched who came into my store. She watched what brands I stocked. Sometimes she would stop by under the excuse of buying something small and ask questions that were too casual. How much do you pay for that soda now? When does your bread arrive? How's business today? I never thought much of it. Curiosity is common in a barrio. So is competition. But after the Pantien, as my store recovered, I began to see Norma standing in her doorway more often, arms crossed, staring at an aisle that looked too empty. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Then the coincidences stacked. Her customers began drifting toward me, the way mine had drifted away during the worst weeks. People started mentioning without being asked that her products didn't last, that her fridge smelled, that her bread arrived damp. I didn't repeat those comments. I didn't want to feed gossip. I also didn't want to admit how cold it made me feel to hear the same complaints in a different mouth. One afternoon, I passed her shop and saw her scraping spoiled meat into a trash bag with a furious, trembling hand. She looked up and met my eyes. The look wasn't hatred. It was fear she couldn't explain without admitting something. A week later, her shutter stayed down all day. Then, it stayed down for good. Neighbors said she was leaving, that she couldn't keep up with rent. The house attached to the shop went dark. Dust collected on her sign like a slow erasure. I do not have proof Norma did anything to me. I never saw her near my store at night. I never caught a hand reaching for that gap in my wall. I never found a note with her name. All I have is a chain of events and the way they line up like footprints that stop just before a door. That's the cruel truth. People don't like. Sometimes you survive something you can't prove. You don't get justice, you get relief. And the relief has teeth because it teaches you how close you were to losing everything. Since then, I don't stack heavy boxes against the wall without checking the seam behind them. I don't ignore flies that insist on one corner. I don't joke when a bulb dies 3 times in the same place. And I don't accept the comfort of easy logic when my gut is already screaming. Dua Matilda told me the dead listen better than the living. I didn't believe that until I stood in the Pantien and watched my own name disappear into fire. Some people hear that and call it superstition. Fine, but remember this. Envy doesn't always stay in whispers. Sometimes it gets organized. Sometimes it writes your birth date in steady ink. Sometimes it hides under your floor and waits for your business to rot from the inside out. If your luck collapses in weeks and every rational fix fails, don't just look at your bills and blame yourself. Look at the places you never move. Look behind the heaviest things you own, because the worst curse isn't the one that chases you in the dark. It is the one that sits quietly beneath your feet, patient until you finally kneel close enough to touch it.